Welcome to Throwing on the Potter's Wheel, the basics. I'm starting with a little over a pound of clay that's already been wedged. I'm going to get that into a ball shape. We're going to tap this down in the center, or as close to the center as we can, of our wheel head. If you lean straight over it and look down, you'll notice that there's some handy circles that help you place that close to the center of our wheel head. And then I like to start out by turning my wheel on very slowly and patting the ball of clay down towards the wheel head. I'm holding my hands at about a 45-degree angle, and I'm tapping both of my hands at the same time so there's pressure on both sides. So with the wheel, I'm using the foot pedal to start the wheel going slowly, and I'm just tapping towards the center and slightly down. What that does is you'll notice it starts to pound the clay into a cone shape, and we're going to pull it up into a cone shape to center it next, but this gives it a head start, so we're just positioning it in a good position. Also, before I get started, I take one of my fingers and I press down where the clay meets the wheel head, and that's going to seal that space so that water doesn't get underneath there and the clay is not going to slide around. If water gets underneath your clay, if it's not sealed to the wheel head, it can slide right off. We're going to add some water to center, and we're going to turn the speed of our wheel up. So I'm going to use my foot pedal and put my speed on high. I'm going to add enough water until the clay is kind of glistening and shiny, and the clay is going to glide smoothly under my hands. So I want to feel that slippery feel, no pulling. So to center, first I'm going to pull the clay up into a cone shape, and I'm using equal pressure on both hands and just shaping my hands in that cone shape. So I'm pressing the clay the direction I want it to go, and you'll notice that my elbow is anchored to my leg. I want to use all the strength of my legs and my arms and lean into this. So I'm going to lean into it and I'm going to squeeze straight up into that cone shape. So we've got a cone now. If you notice that you are moving around and the clay is moving your arms, that means that you're not anchored. So make sure that both of your feet are planted firmly and both of your elbows are planted on your thighs and that you're leaning in. It's helpful if you're directly over looking down on your clay. You're going to be able to see whether it's centered or not, see where it's off, and give yourself that extra body strength, not just your hand strength. So once I've got my cone, now I'm going to press back down. I'm going to put pressure on my right hand. I'm right-handed, so my wheel is going counterclockwise. If you're left-handed, turn everything around and your wheel should be going clockwise. So I'm going to put pressure on my top hand. You'll notice I'm using this left hand to put pressure on the side of the clay so that it doesn't mushroom out. I want to get this down so it looks like a hockey puck or a tuna can. I don't want it to look like a mushroom. So I'm still going pretty fast for the speed, and I'm putting equal pressure, I'm putting more pressure downward, but I'm putting very firm pressure all the way from my leg. I'm really using the strength of my leg to press on the flat part of my hand and hold that flat so that as I press down, it's not going to mushroom out. I want to keep it somewhat like that hockey puck shape. You can cone up 1, 2, or 3 times depending on what you need to get it centered. And I know people that don't cone up at all, so it's not necessary. We'll come up one more time. Now I'm squeezing the clay up into a cone shape and still on high speed. And now I'm going to come back down. I'm putting pressure on that top hand, bringing that straight down and keeping solid pressure on my outside hand. And if you feel the clay getting dry, starting to drag or lose that glistening, shiny look, don't be afraid to introduce a little bit more water. You want it sliding very smoothly under your fingers there. If it starts to pull, you're going to pull it out of center. You'll also notice that I'm not wearing any jewelry and I don't have fingernails. Fingernails tend to grab the clay, and it's not much fun for your fingernails or for the clay. So I tend to keep my fingernails pretty short, and I don't wear jewelry for the same reason. It's not great for the jewelry and it grabs the clay. So we've centered by coning it up and pressing down into this kind of hockey puck shape. At this point, the top of the clay is centered. Sometimes you might notice there might be like a lump of clay or something on the wheel head, so it feels like it's not quite centered, but the top looks centered. especially when you're beginning. Sometimes that can be annoying, or for beginners, it can bump your hand off of center, and actually you can bump your hand and knock your cylinder around and take a piece of clay that you just centered and knock it back out of center. And so if you want to, you can use one of your tools. This is the wooden knife tool. And just cut away that, if there's just a little lump or something right on the wheel head, just don't be afraid to cut that off, get rid of that. The other thing, a lot of beginners get sores on their hands right along here from pressing into the wheel head too hard. So two things you can do. Keep the wheel head kind of clean right there. Don't let a lot of clay build up right where your hand is. And also pay attention to where your pressure is. You don't really want to be putting much pressure down onto the wheel head. The pressure should be leaning in towards the clay. So where are we at here? We've got our hockey puck shape. I happen to have a little knuckle there that when I bring my clay back down, it marks the center for me. So that kind of gives me a target so I can open. There's lots of different ways to open our clay. So we start off by pressing straight down, and then we're going to pull out. Some people use a thumb, some people use two thumbs. I happen to use my middle finger, and I anchor, I keep, again, my elbows are always anchored to my legs, and I stabilize my hands together so that I can make sure that I'm holding that in the center. And I go straight down, and there's not a right or a wrong way to open. I honestly recommend watching as many people throw as you can, surf the YouTube channels, see, and then practice those techniques with your hands and see what works best for you. I've tried opening with my thumb. Lots of people love that. Just does not work for my hands. So what I'm doing, I'm holding very steady and just pressing straight down. And as I feel the clay start to dry out, I'm going to get a little bit more water there so that it's gliding smoothly under my hands. I'm going to keep just enough water so that it's gliding smoothly. If you introduce too much water to it, it can make the clay weaker and your pot will collapse sooner. It washes away the fine particles of clay, and it will also start to feel gritty or groggy as the sand and clay is exposed. The sand and grog is exposed in the clay. So a question that a lot of beginners have is, how far down do I go when I'm opening? A lot of it is just experience and practice and learning how far to go. It also helps if you're leaning straight over, looking straight down. If you've accumulated water in your opening, go ahead and dry that out. And then you can use your needle tool. This is a needle tool. Use your needle tool to measure the depth of your base by putting it straight down. Slide your finger down the needle tool and mark where the clay is, and then bring that up. So you can see it's about 3/8 of an inch or so. And for the bowl that I'm throwing, I want to be able to turn it over, let it dry, and trim a foot later. So 3/8 is a good amount for what I want to do today. Don't worry about that pinhole. That's going to fill right in. You'll never know it was there. So we have centered our clay, we've opened it up, and now the next step is I'm going to form my bottom by pulling my fingers straight back towards my hand. I'm leaving my left hand on the outside, touching the outside of the clay, and I'm just going to pull my inside finger straight towards that hand. A tip for beginners is always sneak up on your clay. Don't touch your clay when the wheel isn't moving. If I have this nice and centered, but if I were to grab it right now, I would put pressure in specific points that would throw it back off center. So you always want to turn your wheel on and have your wheel spinning and the clay moving, and then gently sneak up on it. The same thing when you're letting go. When you're releasing the clay, release it slowly with the wheel still spinning, and then stop the clay. It'll help keep your clay in-centered. A lot of times I'll see beginners have a beautifully centered piece of clay or a beautifully centered cylinder, but just release too fast, and that can throw it out of, knock it off center. So, anchoring my hands, I'm pulling that finger straight out towards my outside hand. And then I'm going to go in and out a little bit just to smooth out and compress the floor. And I'll go in and clean any extra water up with a sponge. Smooth that edge off. So what do we have so far? Now I have a floor. So I've what's happening inside that you probably can't see is my finger has gone out and back in a couple times, and that's compressing it, building that floor. It's compressing it, smoothing it, leveling it. So now that I've got my floor, I've got really thick walls out here. So the next step is to pull our walls. It's called pulling or raising. What's going to happen is I'm going to use equal pressure. I'm going to connect my hands, kind of make them into calipers. And some people use knuckles, some people use fingertips, different fingers. Again, there's no right answer. Play around and see what works best for you, what feels best for your hands. You have about 3 pulls to get the height that you want. And then after that, it's all shaping. So we're going to do our first pull here. My hands are connected, my elbows are on my legs for stability and strength. So that's our pull number 1. I'm just going to clean up, keep that lip kind of nice and clean there. Some people like to use just their fingertips. Some people like to keep a sponge in one hand. You can keep a sponge in one hand, and that way if the clay feels like it's starting to get dry, you can just give it a little squeeze and have some extra moisture right there, close and handy. So you can see that bulge of clay moving up. What's happening is I'm putting pressure, and the clay is going to go towards the path of least resistance, which is straight up. So I'm putting equal pressure on my fingers, and as soon as I squeeze, I start to move up. If you stop halfway up, you're going to continue to put too much pressure and get a thin spot or a weak spot. So once you start to pull up, you want to keep your hands in motion. You want one steady movement. So you're going to squeeze and pull straight up until you get all the way to the top. You also notice I'm not squeezing all the way to the top. I'm actually releasing slightly before the top. It makes your cylinder a bit stronger if you leave the very top edge a little bit thicker. So I'll leave it thicker while I'm throwing and then thin it out towards the very end. So I've pulled this up twice. It's pretty thick, so I could pull it up one more time if I was making a cylinder. I could have a taller cylinder, but I want this to be a bowl shape. So instead of pulling it up again, I'm going to start to shape it outward now. So to shape it outward, I'm going to go in and use my fingers like I'm pulling, but I'm going to put more pressure on my inside hand, and I'm going to travel outward, flaring it out. So I'm starting the same way that I normally pull, getting it, see where it's shiny there. I'm keeping it so there's enough moisture to keep it shiny so my fingers can glide smoothly over the clay. I'm anchoring my elbows to my legs, and I'm squeezing, and I'm starting to move, but I'm pulling slightly out. I'm putting a little more pressure on my inside hand than my outside hand. So we're starting to flare this out into a bowl shape. So you can shape your bowl by using that pressure with your hands is one method. Just put extra pressure on that inside hand and start to flare it out. Another method is to use the rounded part of a rib. A rib that I like to use is this wooden rib. It has a nice angle that makes a nice arc on the inside of the bowl. So I like to use this rib on the inside of the bowl. Again, I'm going to give it a little bit of moisture. And the other thing, sometimes this tip on the rib can gouge the bottom of the bowl, so I tend to mark it with one of my fingers, hold that just so that I know where it's at so I don't accidentally gouge the bowl. So I'm going to use this rib to form a nice round, smooth bowl shape on the inside and work on that flare. So I'm just shaping the inside, making sure that there's no funny bumps or ridges that will be annoying as I eat my soup with a spoon. So I'm making sure the bottom's nice and smooth. So I've used the rib to smooth it out. Now I'm going to just go over it with my sponge. And I'm happy with the shape of the inside. That's nice and smooth. There's nothing irritating for my spoon to drag on there. So now I want to check the rim here and see where we're at with the rim. A lot of times when you're learning to throw, one side of your bowl or cylinder ends up higher than the other side. And that happens because when you opened it, maybe it wasn't completely centered, or maybe there was an air bubble in it. So what you can do if that happens is you can cut the top off with your needle tool. And to do that, you want to anchor your right hand, hold the needle tool in your right hand if you're right-handed, and you're going to put your left hand on the inside of the bowl, just inside the lip, and with the wheel moving, I'm going to line my needle tool up. I'm going to hold it very flat, and I'm going to line it up with the lowest point on the bowl. If there's a low point in the lip, I want to go just below that low point. And I'm going to slowly move that needle tool in towards my inside hand, my left hand on the inside of the pot. When I feel it reach all the way through, I'm going to lift straight up. And that will give you a nice level top. Then you can smooth that lip off. You can get any big chunks off first with your sponge. And then we can use a chamois. And notice when I started throwing this for the centering, I was going quite fast. For the shaping, I was going a little bit slower. And now for this, the really refining, I go pretty slow. I like to go pretty slow when I'm doing the final work here. So I've used the foot pedal and I've slowed my wheel down. I'm going to use this chamois, and I'm going to wrap the chamois over the lip. You want the lip on bowls and cups to be as smooth as possible. And so the chamois, or some people use a piece of plastic, you can wrap it over and really round and smooth that off. I'm also bending it slightly out to give a little bit of a lip to my, flaring the lip out on my soup bowl here. So as soup sloshes around, it's not going to spill so easy. So I'm happy with the shape of that. So I'm going to call that done. The last thing I like to do is use my knife tool and clean up the bottom just a little bit before I cut it off. So I'll come in level with the wheel head first, and then I'll come in from the side and just cut any excess off of my bowl. What that does is it makes a lot less work when I trim later on. So this is going to firm up till tomorrow, and then I'll flip it over and I'll trim the bottom tomorrow. But it saves a little bit of work if I just clean this bottom up while it's still on the wheel head and while it's still centered. Basically, I'm just getting rid of that excess, any excess clay on the bottom. And then also, you see it'll come off in little strips like this. Also then when I'm cutting with the wire tool, I'm going to use my wire tool to run underneath the bowl to release it from the wheel head. It's just less clay that it has to go through. So you absolutely don't have to do this. You could just, you could skip the step, go straight to the wire tool and cut your bowl right off the wheel head and put it on a wear board. But I'm just going to clean it up a little bit here. And then this is the wire tool, literally just a wire attached to two handles. You're going to want to hold that with 2 fingers. Press your fingers down onto the wheel head, and we're going to slide it underneath. I also usually add a little bit of water there so that I'm dragging a little bit of water under my pot to help it release. You can just pull it straight towards yourself, or you can turn the wheel head on a little bit. I usually turn my wheel head on just a little bit. And it's going to go straight under the bowl. You can watch the wire pull right under your bowl there. And then I'm going to lift with 2 fingers straight up. If it doesn't release, if it's feeling a little sticky, if you give it a little twist, usually that will help release it. And I keep a stack of wear boards ready. So here's our wear board. And we're just going to use a couple fingers. We're going to lift. There's our soup bowl. It might go a little bit wonky oval in the lifting process, but when I set it right back down on the wear board, it'll go back into center. So this is our soup bowl.